The last chair came out of the dark at 7 minutes past 5, friends. And I want you to stand where I stood to meet it, because I have stood there every night for 57 years. Top station of the old Summit Lift, Ute Park, Colorado, the 22nd of February, 1969. Storm dying, wind laying down, the light that gray-violet a mountain gets when the snow finally quits at dusk, and the chairs coming up out of the fog of the last pitch one by one, empty, empty, empty. The way they do at close of day, swinging a little, shedding snow. And I was waiting on one chair that was not supposed to be empty, friends, because my partner Vern Askew had radioed from the bottom terminal 9 minutes earlier, laughing, half froze, saying, "Last customer coming up, Danny, put the coffee on. 9 minutes is the ride." I heard the bullwheel take his weight. Friends, you learn the sound. A lift talks to you all day. The pitch of the cable dips a half tone when a man sits down at the bottom, and I heard it dip, and I stood at the top with 2 cups. And at 7 past 5, his chair came up out of the dark of the last span, the long span, the one between Tower 7 and Tower 8, and swung into my lamplight. Empty, friends. And I want the next part said exactly, because it is the whole of why you are here tonight. Not empty like the others. The safety bar was down, friends. Latched. Swung down into its keeper the way a man pulls it down over his own lap, a thing it cannot do by itself. A thing we checked on that lift 10 times that same night with gloves and a level. It will not fall on its own, and behind that lowered bar, in the 2 inches of new snow lying on the seat boards, was the print of a sitting man, friends. Thighs, seat, the clean shadow where a body had kept the snow off, crisp at the edges, fresh. And the snow in that print unmelted, and Vern Askew's rhyme still on the footrest. And Vern Askew himself. Friends, nowhere on this mountain, or on any mountain, from that minute to this one. A man rode 9 minutes up a cable in a storm's last hour, and somewhere over the long span between Tower 7 and Tower 8, in about 40 seconds of dark that no eye on earth was watching, he stopped being on the chair, friends. And the chair, I will swear this to God on the coldest morning he owns, the chair arrived latched. Before we ride that cable together, do one thing for an old patroller. Put in the comments where you are tonight, your town, your state, and whether you have ever ridden a chairlift alone at dusk, the last one up, with the empty chairs coming down past you like a procession. I read every one of them. If you have, you already know the feeling this account lives inside of. My name is Dane Kilgore. In 1969, I was 24 years old and a professional ski patroller at Ute Park, a little upstart resort in the San Juan mountains of southwestern Colorado. 2 lifts, a lodge that smelled of wax and chili, and some of the finest steep snow in North America. Friends, hung above a town of 900 souls that had been a mining camp before it was anything. I want you to understand the trade first, because the trade is the frame of this account. A ski patroller in those years was medic, avalanche man, fence builder, and shepherd, all on wooden skis. We opened the mountain in the dark with bombs on our backs. We closed it in the dark with sweep, and sweep, friends, is the word you need. At close of every day, patrol skis every run on the mountain, top to bottom, in pairs, calling the mountain clear, because the first commandment of the trade, drilled into me my first morning by the director, a granite old Austrian named Emil Statler, is this: the mountain is not closed until every soul on it is accounted for. We counted strangers all day, friends. We were good at it. That is the bitter joke of this account. The men whose whole job was accounting for everybody lost one of their own, between 2 lift towers, in plain procedure, with a radio call on either end of it, and could not account for him. Not that night. Not that spring when the snow gave up its secrets. Which it did, friends. All of them but one. Not ever. And I want to build you the world of it, friends, because a ski hill in 1969 is a country that no longer exists, and this account lives in its particular light. No grooming machines to speak of, no snowmaking, no radios on the guests, no cameras anywhere on God's mountain. The snow was what fell, and the guests were what drove up the canyon in chained-up station wagons, doctors from Durango and ranch kids on hand-me-down boards and honeymooners who could not turn. And the whole enterprise ran on rope, diesel, and about 30 of us, friends, lifties and patrollers and lodge girls, a crew that ate together and feuded together and skied powder together at dawn before the public came. And the mountain at closing time, friends, this is the thing you cannot know unless you worked one. The mountain at closing time empties like a church. 1 hour there are 400 souls sliding around hooting, and then the light goes flat, and the last station wagons crunch out of the lot, and the hill is suddenly enormous, friends, enormous and breathing, and the chairs go around empty in the dusk with their small creaks, and every man who ever worked a lift crew knows the feeling I mean, and not one of us ever said it out loud. The feeling, along about the last spin of the bullwheel, that the day shift was over, friends, and something else's shift was starting, and it was time for warm-blooded folks to be off the hill. We joked instead. Every trade jokes where it will not say. Chewy V. Hill at the bottom terminal had a thing he said every single night at final spin, a little Spanish under his breath as the last chair left his ramp, and I asked him once, my first season, what it was, and he grinned and said, "I tell the lift good night, Danny." And I asked him why, friends, and he looked up the line, into the dark where the cable climbed toward the long span, and he said, "Because my uncle taught me you always say good night, loud enough to be heard, to whoever is still riding." And Vern, friends, Vern Askew gets his portrait before this account moves one more foot, because everything after belongs to him. 31 that winter, 7 seasons on patrol, a Kansas boy who had come up for one ski season in '62 and done what mountain towns do to certain men, which is keep them. Built like a fence post, laughed like a door slamming, the strongest skier I ever followed, and the gentlest hand with a scared casualty I ever saw, friends. He would talk a broken leg warm. He taught me sweep. He taught me the mountain's moods and the avalanche craft. And he taught me, friends, mark this, he was the one who taught me the rule this whole account turns on. My first week, riding up in a snow squall. "Last sweep rides the lift in pairs, Danny," he said. And I said, "Why? The chairs hold one fine." And Vern Askew looked out at the long span coming, the one between 7 and 8, where the cable sags over the old burn. And he was quiet a second, and then he grinned the grin he kept for things he did not want to say plain, and he said, "Because the mountain counts us too, Danny, and we like to make it easy arithmetic." 7 years later, friends, on the 22nd of February 1969, at 4:58 in the afternoon, with one last tourist safely down and the storm dying, Vern Askew waved that tourist's bus off, radioed me the coffee joke, and swung onto the last chair of the day. Alone, friends. Alone because I was already at the top and somebody had to be. Breaking his own first rule, the rule he taught me, one time, in 7 years. For 9 minutes of cable he had ridden 5,000 times. And the mountain, friends, did its arithmetic. What a man does in the first 60 seconds of the impossible tells you who he is, friends, and I will report mine honestly. I stood at the top station holding 2 coffees, looking at a latched, empty chair going around the bullwheel, and my body understood before my mind was allowed to. I dropped both cups, keyed my radio, and said the words that changed the shape of the mountain forever. "Chewy, stop the lift." Vern's chair came up empty, and there was a silence on that channel, friends. 3 seconds, that I can still stand inside of. And then Chewy Vigil, the bottom operator, 20 years on lifts, a man of great calm, said the second impossible thing of the evening, quiet, like he was checking his own math out loud. "Danny," he said. I loaded him myself. I put the bar down for him because his hands were full of his skis, and I watched his chair to the top of Tower 5. "And Danny," he said, and here his voice did a thing I had never heard it do. "The tension needle has been reading his weight the whole ride. It is reading it right now." Friends, the old lifts kept a tension gauge at the drive terminal, a needle that breathes with the load on the rope. And Chewy Vigil, who watched that needle the way sailors watch weather, was telling me that whatever left that chair over the long span, the cable had not felt it go. The rope carried Vern Askew's weight, friends, by the needle, all the way to the top, and delivered me 180 pounds of nothing, with the bar latched over its lap. And when they pulled the recorder disc from that gauge 2 days later, the men who came for it found the load trace smooth to the last tower, friends. No drop, no bounce. And a lift engineer from Denver put his finger on the paper where Tower 8 should read, and said, to a room of us, "This trace is not possible. A load that leaves a rope leaves a mark, gentlemen. Weight does not get off a chairlift politely." The night itself, friends, we did everything the trade knew. Statler had the mountain floodlit where floodlights existed, and lantern lit where they did not. And patrol swept the summit runs in pairs, twice, top to bottom, probing the deep drifts under the lift line, Because the sane theory, the only theory, was that Vern had somehow raised the bar, fallen, and been swallowed by new snow. Except the bar was down, friends, keep holding that, and accept what we found under the long span at 9:40 that night, which I found, myself, my headlamp, my discovery, God help me. Between Tower 7 and Tower 8, the lift line crosses the old burn, a steep open scar of dead gray timber from a fire before the resort was born. And out in the middle of that burn, 40 feet downhill of the cable's shadow, my lamp crossed a ski track. One track, friends, one set, a clean pair of parallel lines in 2 feet of fresh, untouched powder. And I skied to it, whooping his name, because a track meant alive. A track meant he jumped or fell and skied for help. And I put my light up its length, friends, and my whoop died in my chest. The track began, friends, in the middle of the slope. I do not mean I lost its beginning. I mean it had none. 40 feet of virgin snow above, untouched as a hotel bed, on every side, and then 2 ski tracks starting out of nothing, mid-slope, mid-stride, already carving, the way tracks would look if a man had been skiing for some time before the world let him print on it. And they ran 200 yards down the burn, easy linked turns, unhurried turns, friends. Nobody flees in turns like that. Those were the turns of a man skiing home. And then, at the bottom of the burn, in open snow, flat light, no cliff, no tree well, no hole, no drift, they stopped. Both skis, mid-glide. The way a sentence stops when the speaker sees something. Beyond the last track, friends, untouched powder to the tree line. And I stood alone in the old burn at 10 at night, with my lamp on that last yard of track. And I heard nothing, friends. And that was the wrongest part. A snowy mountain at night is full of small sounds, settlement, slough, wind working the dead trees. And the burn was silent the way a held breath is silent. And I will confess the truth of that minute to you because this account deserves it. I did not follow procedure. I did not probe the area. I skied out of that burn faster than I have ever skied in my life, friends, and I did not look behind me. And when Statler asked me at the bottom why my hands would not hold a pencil for the report, I told him it was the cold. And Emil Statler, 40 years in mountains on 2 continents, looked at me a long moment and said, in that accent like rocks in a bucket, "Yeah, the cold. It is always the cold," and signed the report himself. And I owe you Vern's last day in full, friends, because the investigators combed it for a cause, and I have combed it for 57 years for a warning. And there is none. And the none is the horror. It was an ordinary perfect day. 11 inches of new snow overnight, avalanche work at dawn. Vern and I threw our charges off the ridge and skied the results and pronounced the mountain safe. And it was, friends, for everyone but him. He ate 2 bowls of the lodge chili at noon and shortchanged me at cribbage. He splinted a boy's wrist at 2 and made the boy laugh doing it. At 4 he took the bottom rotation because it was his turn, friends. Plain rotation, nothing more. And the last thing he ever said to me face to face, at the top of the mountain at 4 o'clock, with the storm already dying, and the light going that gray-violet, was about my skis. "Your bases are dry, Danny," he said. "Hot wax tonight or you will be walking tomorrow." That is the last sentence, friends. 7 years of that man's wisdom in my ears, and the closing line is wax your skis. And I have, friends. Every night before, for 57 years, whether the skis needed it or not, I have waxed my skis the night before. And if you want to know what grief does with nowhere to go, it does that. It keeps the small commandments forever. The county came at first light, friends, sheriff and deputies and the coroner on standby. And it was a good, honest, small county effort, and I will not mock 1 hour of it. They probed the lift line for 3 days. They ran a dog, friends, a good avalanche shepherd out of Silverton. And I was there when she worked the burn. And you have sat at this lamp before, some of you. You know what I am about to say. That dog took Vern's scent off his spare parka, strong and glad, cast up the burn, hit the beginning of that track, the nothing where it started, and stopped, and sat. And looked, friends, not up this time. I have heard the accounts where they look up. She looked at the track. She looked down its length, ears forward, the way a dog looks at a thing that is present, friends, at a man standing in plain view that no one else can see. And she leaned back hard against her handler's legs. And she made a sound I have never heard a dog make before or since. A low talking sound, almost words. And her handler, a hard old Norwegian, listened to it, and then he clipped her lead on and said to the sheriff, "We are done here. She is not lost, Sheriff. She is being polite to something, and I do not care to learn what." And they walked out of the burn, friends, and no dog was ever asked to work it again. And in May, when the snow went, the county walked 40 men shoulder to shoulder down that burn and found 3 lost mittens, a 1951 lift ticket, and an elk skeleton, and a Vern Askew, who weighed 180 pounds on a cable's needle all the way to the top. Nothing, friends. Nothing at all. Then or ever. Now the long span itself, friends, towers 7 and 8, because after that spring I did what the men of my other accounts have done. I turned scholar on the exact piece of ground that took what was mine, and what I learned came in 3 layers, each one older than the last. The first layer was ours, the resort's, and it was written in the lift logs, and I had never read them because young men do not read logs, friends. They write them. The summit lift went up in 1962, and from its first winter, scattered through 7 years of dutiful pencil, the operators had been recording a thing they had no column for. Heavy chairs, friends, and light ones. Chair comes down at close of day, empty by every eye on the mountain, and the needle at the drive terminal dips as it passes the tension gauge. Dips like a passenger, friends. 160, 180 pounds of passenger, on an empty chair, coming down off the mountain at dusk. Chewy Viheel had logged 11 of them across 7 winters. Always the last hour of light. Always, when the sheave men could pin the section, riding out of the long span. And 4 times, friends, 4, the opposite. A loaded chair going up with a skier the loaders swore to, that crossed the gauge weighing nothing at all. The company wrote it up as ice on the rope, ice sheds, gauge drift. And I want to be fair, friends. Ice is real. Gauges do drift. But gauges do not drift only at dusk, and only in one span. And Chewy Viheel, I learned that summer, had for years kept a private custom at the loading ramp. A thing I had watched him do 100 times and read as friendliness. Last hour of the day, Chewy touched every rider as he loaded them, friends. A hand on the shoulder, a pat on the arm, steadying nobody who needed steadying. I asked him about it, the summer after. Over beers his wife pretended not to count, and Chewy looked at his own right hand a while and said, "My uncle ran the T-bar here when this was a rope tow hill after the war, Danny. He taught me the loading trade, and he taught me, touch the last ones, mijo. What rides at dusk is not always warm," he said, "and a warm hand knows." And I said, "And if one is not warm, Chewy?" And he finished his beer, friends, and stood up and said, "Then you do not stop the lift. You let it ride. It is going home same as everybody." His uncle taught him that in 1949, friends, 13 years before the summit chairs existed. Whatever rode at dusk, it was not riding our lift because it was ours. Our lift had been built across its road. If this is your first evening at this lamp, one short word and we ride on. This channel is an old man and the accounts that never fit the incident reports. Told plain, no music jumping at you, no invented pictures. If that is worth your night, subscribe, so the next account finds you. And when this one is done, do me the particular kindness. Next time you ride a chairlift, any chairlift in any season, look down once at the ground passing under your skis and ask yourself how many feet of air you are trusting to a rope and a rule, friends. Then enjoy the view. It is still the finest ride in the world. It is just not always only ours. The second layer was the burn, friends. The long span crosses it because the engineers in 61 drew the straightest line between 2 good tower sites, the way engineers do. And the old timber cruisers maps they drew over, which I found in the county archive stamped 1922, had a note on that scar in a careful clerk's hand, and the note said, "Burn of unknown year, standing dead, do not cruise, locals do not enter." And some clerk of 1922, friends, some man with sleeve garters 1,000 miles from any folklore, had added after it, in parentheses, the strangest 3 words I ever met in a government margin. Signed, quote, "They say it is crossed ground," unquote. Crossed ground, friends. And the third layer under that one was older than paper. There were still Ute families in the valley then, older people whose grandparents had wintered that country before the mines. And I went, hat in hand, 25 years old and stupid with grief, to ask an elder named Mr. Cloud, who sold firewood off his truck and knew everything, whether the burn had a story. And Mr. Cloud looked at me a long time, friends, not unkindly, and he said, "You are the boy from the chairs." And I said I was. And he said, my grandmother would not walk that hillside, and her people would not walk it. And it was not because of anything in it, son. It is because it is a between place. Some ground is a wall, he said, and some ground is a door, and some ground, and he pointed his chin up the valley at the burn, some ground is a hallway, and you do not build furniture in a hallway, son. And you especially, and here he looked at me dead level, friends, you especially do not hang swings in one. And then he sold me my firewood, friends, and would not take money for the half cord, and never spoke of it to me again. And I have sat with the phrase for half a century. We hung swings in a hallway, 60 chairs on a cable, back and forth, dawn to dusk, through a piece of sky something older than the county considered a corridor, friends. And for 7 years it tolerated us, stepping around our furniture, riding our chairs at dusk when its road and our rope ran the same direction, paying its fare in pounds on a needle, and doing no harm, friends, mark that. 11 heavy chairs in 7 years and never one scratch on a guest. It was polite, friends, politer than we were. Until the evening we sent at Vern Askew, alone, at closing time, on the last chair. And I have had 57 years to wonder whether what happened over that span was malice, friends, or whether it was something worse. And I have settled on worse. I do not believe it took him the way a wolf takes. I believe the last chair at dusk, in that span, is sometimes not our furniture anymore, friends. I believe it is the other traffic. And I believe Vern Askew sat down, tired and laughing, in something's seat. The men with the pale green truck came in March, friends, and this being one of my accounts, you have been waiting for them. But I want you to notice who they were, because it was not the Bureau this time, and the difference instructs. Ute Park stood on national forest land. Every western resort does. The mountain is leased, friends. The lifts stand by federal permission called a special use permit. And when a man dies or vanishes on the lease, the Forest Service audits. That is normal. That is the daylight world. What was not normal was the 2 men the region sent, friends, who wore the uniform, but whom our district ranger, a good man we knew, plainly had never met and visibly answered to, and what they audited. They took the tension recorder discs, friends, all 7 winters of them, out of the drive terminal cabinet, receipted on a form our ranger had never seen before. They took the operator's logs with Chewy's 11 heavy chairs in them. They took my sweep report and Statler's incident file, and the photographs of the ski track, the ones with the beginning that was not there, and the negatives, friends, from the drugstore in town, which means they knew where a small county develops its film. And then the older one, gray, courteous, tired in the way I have since learned to recognize across many accounts, sat with Statler and me in the patrol room with the door open, everything friendly, and asked us questions for an hour that were all, every one, the same question wearing different coats. Had anything like this happened on this lift before? And Statler, Granite Statler, gave him the company answers. Ice, gauge drift, no sir, nothing. And the gray man nodded along, friends, and wrote nothing down, and at the end he closed his folder and said the sentence that told us everything and nothing, the sentence I have carried like a pebble in my boot for 57 years. Gentlemen, he said, standing, for what it is worth, you have a well-run mountain, and your lift line is correctly placed. And Statler said, correctly placed for what? And the gray man put on his hat, friends, and looked out the patrol room window, up the hill, at the long span you could just see against the sky, and he said, for the traffic, and wished us a good season. And the pale green truck went down the access road, and the discs and the logs and the negatives went with it, and no report of any kind ever came back to the county, the company, the family, or the file. What came instead, friends, quietly, the following autumn, was a directive, routed through the company as their own idea, and I only know its true origin because our district ranger drank. The trail map was redrawn for the 70 season. The burn, which had never been a run, was now marked out of bounds, permanently closed, avalanche hazard, which was a lie, friends. That slope will not slide, wrong shape, and every patroller knew it. And on the lift itself, a new operations rule, in the manual, printed. The final ascent of each operating day shall be made by not fewer than 2 employees. Vern's rule, friends. The rule he taught me in a snow squall. The rule the old T-bar men kept before us. Come back to us, laundered through a federal directive, set in type. And I remember standing with the new manual in my hand, thinking, they did not learn this from our incident. This was too fast, too calm, too practiced. Somewhere, friends, in whatever office owns the pale green trucks, There is a manual about our manuals, and our long span is one line of it, and Vern Askew is one line of that line, and that is all the justice, all the explanation, and all the goodbye the daylight world ever offered him. His people in Kansas got a memorial service over an empty box and a settlement from the company that was generous enough to have a signature on it somewhere high up, friends. And his skis, which came up on the next chair behind the empty one that night, standing in the rack where I set them, stood in the patrol room 7 more years, because no man would move them, until the room was repainted one summer and they were gone, friends, and no one, to this day, admits to knowing where. The people of this account deserve their accounting too, friends, before the last stretch, because a vanishing does not happen to one man, it happens to a crew. Emil Statler ran the patrol 4 more winters and retired to a cabin above town, and he never spoke Vern's name in my hearing again. But he did a thing every February that told me where the name lived. On the 22nd, whatever the weather, Statler rode the summit lift once, alone, mid-morning, safest hour, up and down, no skis, friends, an old man in a wool coat riding a chairlift like a fairy. And he told the lifties it was to check the ride quality. And the lifties, bless them, wrote it in the log every year exactly that way. Ride quality check, E. Statler. 19 years of Februaries, friends, until his last one. Ride quality. That was a granite Austrian's way of visiting a grave that goes around on a wheel. And Chewy Vigil worked that bottom ramp until his hands quit on him in '86, touching the dusk riders every night, saying his good night to the cable loud enough to be heard. And when he retired, the company gave him a plaque for 31 years without a loading accident, friends. And at his party, deep in the evening, Chewy held that plaque on his knees and said to me, quiet, under the music, "They count wrong, Danny." And I said, "How so, Chewy?" And he said, 31 years, 1 loading accident. I loaded Vern. And no man at that party could tell him different, friends. And I have thought since that half the silence in every account I carry is exactly that arithmetic, done by good men, alone, at parties, in trucks, at gravesides, forever. The trade counts what it lost and the paper counts 0, and both books balance, friends, and that is the coldest trick the quiet world plays on the loud one. And the chairs kept score, friends. That is the part I owe you before the last stretch. I stayed at Ute Park. You will ask why, and the answer is the answer of every account like mine. Somebody has to keep the watch who knows what he is watching. I made director when Statler retired, and for 24 more winters I kept his counsel and Chewy's customs. We never sent a rider up the last chair alone, ever, and I touched the shoulders of the dusk riders like Chewy taught. Friends, every one, all those years, and 11 more times in 24 winters the needle at the bottom dipped for an empty chair at close of day. Always the long span, always the failing light, and we let those chairs ride, friends, unloaded whatever was not there at the top, and said nothing. And once, only once, in '81, a February evening with the light exactly like the night I lost him, the last empty chair came around the bullwheel at the top, and the snow on the seatboards, friends, was pressed in the shape of a sitting man, and the bar was latched, and on the footrest, melted through 2 inches of powder in 2 neat boot-shaped islands, was the print of a pair of boots, friends, resting easy. The way a man rests his boots when the ride is long and he is in no hurry. And I stood there alone, an old director with 2 coffees going cold on the shift shack rail out of a habit 12 years dead. And I did not stop the lift, friends. I stood back from the platform, and I touched the brim of my hat to that chair the way you do to a rider you know, and I let it go around and go down. And I will not tell you I saw anything because I did not, friends. But I will tell you that halfway to Tower 8, in the dark of the long span, the needle at the bottom terminal, Chewy's needle, watched by Chewy's nephew that year, lifted, friends, and came back to 0. Somebody got off where the door is, and the coffee steamed on the rail, and the mountain was closed, and every soul on it was accounted for, friends. Every soul but the one, the same one, the only one my whole long life of counting ever came up short. The old summit lift came down in 1994, friends, and the last day of its life is the last chapter of this account, and I would not trade my place at it for any easy sleep the trade ever cost me. The company had built a fast new quad up the ridge line, well away from the burn, friends, a routing every patroller understood and no memo explained, and that September a crew came to strip the old line, and I was 50 years old and director emeritus, and I pulled every string I had to be the man at the top station for the final operation of the summit lift, which is called the last carrier sweep, friends. You run the empty chain one full revolution, inspecting, before the rope comes down forever. 60 empty chairs, one last ride around, a lift's funeral procession. And I stood at the top with, and you knew this, friends, you knew it before I said it, with 2 cups of coffee on the rail, 50 years old, 40 of them spent learning exactly how little I know about that span. And the chairs came up out of the long span one by one in the September sun, empty, empty, empty. And chair 41, friends. Chair 41 came up out of the Burns airspace with its safety bar down, latched, in its keeper. On a warm, dry afternoon, on a chair inspected bar up at the bottom by a crew chief I trusted, with no snow to hold a shape and no dusk to hide a thing. Just an empty chair wearing its bar like a lap belt, friends. And on the wooden seat boards, sun-warm, bone-dry, there was a handprint. One, friends. A right hand, pressed into the September dust that films a chair in the yard season, fingers spread, planted on the seat the way a man plants his hand to boost himself off, friends. The way you push up out of a chair when your stop is coming and your legs are stiff and the ride, at long last, is over. I stopped the lift, friends. Myself, the last stop of the summit lift's life. And I walked to that chair, and I looked at that handprint a long time, and Vern Askew was right-handed, and I am not going to tell you I measured it or matched it, because I did not, friends. I am a patroller, not a coroner, and some accounts you close with evidence, and some you are given the mercy of closing with belief. I put my own hand down in the dust beside it, not touching, friends, side by side the way 2 men's hands lie on a shared armrest, and I said out loud, in the September quiet, with the crew waiting respectful down the line, 25 years, partner, long ride. And then I raised the bar, friends, myself, with my bare hand, the way you do for a passenger whose hands are full. And I sent chair 41 around the bullwheel and down the line to the yard. And the rope came off the towers that week, and the towers came out by helicopter, and the long span between 7 and 8 is just sky now, friends, just weather and ravens. The hallway swept clean of our furniture at last, and if there is any part of this account I ask you to keep, it is that the mountain never once, in 32 years of our trespass, took a guest, a child, a stranger. It kept its business with the trade, friends, with us, with the men who ran furniture through its hallway for a living. And there is a bleak, square honor in that I have come to respect the way you respect weather. The paper trail, friends, for those of you who keep the ledgers of these accounts with me. The tension discs and logs have never surfaced, the negatives neither. And the special use permit file for Ute Park, which a curious historian requested in 2008, came back with the years 62 through 70, quote, unavailable due to records consolidation, unquote, which is a phrase you now know how to read. And one thing more, friends, the thing I found last, the thing I saved for last, because it reframes every other thing. When the lift company cleared the old T-bar shed in '94, they found the operator logs from the rope tow era, 1940s, Chewy's uncle's era, and Chewy's nephew, knowing my long watch, brought me one waterlogged ledger before the dumpster got it. And in the winter of 1949, friends, in a spidery pencil hand, on a hill that was then 1 rope and 1 T-bar and a warming hut, 20 years before Vern, 13 years before the summit lift existed, an operator whose name is water-stained past reading wrote the following, and I will read it to you exactly, because it is the oldest sentence in this whole account, and it knew everything. Quote, February the 20th. Do not send the last man up alone after the light goes. Ernst did, and the bar was down. End quote. Friends, Ernst did, and the bar was down. 1949. There is no Ernst in any county record I can find. No wage book, no census line, no grave, friends. And by now you know that the absence is the record. They have been riding that hillside longer than we have been building furniture in it. And they were losing last men to the dusk when the furniture was a rope and a prayer. And the rule was old when Vern taught it to me. And the rule will outlive every lift that mountain ever hangs. And so, friends, at the end of the long watch, here is the rule, yours now. From Ernst, whoever he was, through a water-stained ledger, through Chewy's uncle, through Chewy, through Vern Askew. God rest and keep him wherever the long span lets out, through me, to you. In the mountains, in the dusk, the last one goes accompanied. On the lift, on the trail, on the road, out of the office, out of the hospital room, friends. It is all the same rule. The last one through the door goes accompanied, because the mountain counts us, and we like to make it easy arithmetic. Put your town in the comments for an old patroller, and the chairlift you remember from when you were young. I keep the list. It is a long, lovely list, and it glows like lift lights at night. Thank you for riding sweep with me, friends. Keep your bar down, keep your partner close, and leave a light on. Good night.